get into the meat and potatoes. So I'm going to start with going through my inspiration for this lecture and just what brought me to make it. I was going for a walk after struggling a lot with some relationship issues. I was turning this problem over and over in my mind of I feel like this person isn't right for me. Maybe I should break up with them. Maybe I need to try more. Maybe I need to change. Just constant thoughts in my mind. And I decided to go for a walk, try and clear my head to figure this out. And partly what I've realized, or I suppose re-realized again, is just how common it is to constantly ruminate in your mind, to just think and think and think and think, and not come to a solution. And so in this lecture, that's what I hope to help with, is rumination, to be constantly just constantly using logic to solve emotional problems, which almost never works and gets people in trouble, and how to better understand yourself so that if you do have a problem in the future, or any problem you face in the future, you have a better experience and a better time dealing with it. So that's where I'm coming from. With that being said, there's some few fundamental things that I need to teach first before we get to the more rumination intellectualization part. And that is to be able to understand the mind. And when I say understand the mind, I mean it in a very experimental way. When we talk about Western science, for example, things are done onto a person. I do a randomized control study on 30 other people. I'm the researcher. And I'm applying an effect, or I'm giving them a medicine to see what happens. But I can never truly know what's going on in the mind. Just as like you can never truly know what's in my mind. And so the problem with Western medicine is that it is very hard to DIY it. It's very hard to do it yourself to solve real problems. The term intellectualization comes from Freud. And it's a defense mechanism that he perceived, or that he ran across when he was doing therapy to other people. Ironically, Freud was also a crazy man and did a lot of intellectualization himself. And so just because you understand it doesn't mean that it is applicable, which is why I'm going to be using an Eastern conception of the mind, Vedic psychology, to understand it. Because it is a DIY situation, it is very applicable to your life, and even without me explaining it, you can probably figure out yourself. A lot of the things I'm going to be teaching, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I have a public experience of that. So let's get into it. So I'm now going to describe the parts of the mind. Let me pick a thingy. So let me venture out any guesses. I'll give you the first one. It's called the manas, or in English, the emotional mind. This is the part of you that's reactive, has wants and dislikes, and again is the emotional mind. So, for example, when you feel anger, that's not a very conscious choice. You don't choose to feel angry. It's a very reactive, very quick reaction. In the same way, if you try a cheeseburger for the first time, you don't exactly decide whether you like it or dislike it. It's a very in-the-moment reactive sort of situation. And oftentimes, emotions don't really come from anywhere. They just happen. Sebastian talks about the monkey brain, the amygdala and logical part, which is the second part of the mind, or the Buddhi. This is the intellect. This is the part of your mind that uses logic, is analytical, and can utilizes its memory or where memory is stored. Either one. And please do tell me if I'm losing some of you. Let me just check my notes. So I think everybody can understand that they have a emotional part of their mind and an intellectual part of their mind. In fact, this is a common phrase used in dialectical behavioral therapy called when you have your emotional mind, a very reactive part of yourself, and your logical mind, which is kind of removed, sort of left brain, right brain sort of thing. You bring them together and you have wise mind. But the issue is that these two parts of the mind can be hijacked. What are they hijacked by exactly? Something called the Ahamkara, or the ego. Now, I've talked about the ego before, but the ego is the sense of I am. ... Anything that follows I am is ego. It's your sense of identity. It's where comparison happens. And we often say comparison is a thief of joy, right? The reason that comparison is part of the ego is that, let's say I'm at the gym and I'm looking around, I'm like, man, some of these people are so much hotter, so much buffer than I am. In order for there to be a comparison, there needs to be a me, and I'm sad, and it needs to be another person. There cannot be a comparison without an I. What else am I missing? So you have the emotional mind. This is kind of the reactive thing, what you like, what you dislike. The Buddhi, which is your intellect. It's where your logic is hosted. The Ahamkara, which is your sense of identity. And finally, there's your Samskaras. You could think of this almost as the unconscious or kind of like trauma. Unfortunately, there's no real English name for this. But this is an emotional storehouse. That's it. So, for example, if I am 6 years old and I get bitten by a dog, and then my parents, they comfort me, they give me ice cream, they take my mind off what was this like very scary experience. If I'm 6 years old and then I see a dog again, what kind of emotions do you think I'm going to feel? Pain isn't an emotion. It's a sensory experience. But you are close. Scared, right? I'm going to feel scared. And so, yeah, fear. And so, the first time I see a dog, which I'm going to draw an incredibly terrible dog here. The first time I see a dog, there's fear. And then my parents distract me. And that fear goes into my emotional storehouse, my samskara. Then, the next day, when I see a dog, that same samskara is going to activate, almost like a program, like an exe. The fear exe loads up. And in the West, we often consider this what we call trauma. If I was abused as a child, any event that reminds you of that abuse will activate my fear, make me hypervigilant, maybe get me angry, etc., etc. Another way to think about the samskara, or samskara, is any irrational degree of emotion. And this can be positive too. If I see a dog, or if my parents gave me a dog when I was 6, and I have so many happy memories with this dog and we've been through so much, if I see somebody else's dog, I'm probably going to feel elated, I'm probably going to feel excited, but it's just a dog. The dog itself is neither good nor bad. It doesn't have any properties. It's just a dog. And so you can have irrational degrees of emotion to an external stimulus, neither a positive or a negative direction. Is everybody following me so far? Okay, perfect. So now we get to understanding how this all fits into your life. So, kind of the special thing about both the Ahamkara, or your identity, and Samskaras, is that they have a level of control over your manas and buddhi. For example, get rid of this for a second. If I believe I am, remember, the identity is anything that follows I am ... I identify as a loser. And I've had negative experiences in the past of my samskara of, you know, I lost a competition and my girlfriend dumped me. And I don't know, you failed a test. These are all negative experiences that often do not get processed. And so they feed in to this identity of I am a loser. Now, when you have this identity, this is ever present. The manas, or your sort of emotional mind, it doesn't have any sense of permanence. You feel an emotion and then it goes away. You like something and then maybe you can dislike it the next day. There's no sense of constancy to it. Whereas identities are constant. So I have this identity of I am a loser. And then I have a new experience. I see this girl and I think, oh, maybe I should talk to her. Maybe I should go up to her. And then this identity goes to my manas and my buddhi. And it's like, first I start to experience fear and anxiety and that sort of thing. But also, and here's the tricky part, my ego, I go to the buddhi, I go to the intellect and say, come up with a reason as to protect me from like these negative emotions. So a very classic example of this is you're in a club, you go up to someone who you like, and they reject you. And then your friends are like, oh, she wasn't good for you anyway, so she wasn't that fine. That's your ego being like, I'm better than this person, I don't deserve this treatment, I am ... It compromises your intellect and makes you think in all these strange sort of ways. This is often why when you're arguing with someone who's really infuriating, and they have a very strong stance, it doesn't really matter what logical argument you give, because their ego is actually the one running the show. The ego is the one controlling their intellect and giving them all sorts of reasons, which they believe are logical. But again, it's because they're compromised. This can happen in a negative way too. Of if you take the same situation and you get rejected by a girl that you ask out, you think, oh, I suck. I'm a loser. I should never do this again. And you think, well, how does this help me? In the previous example, yeah, it helps me not feel rejected. It helps me feel better about myself. But why would telling myself I'm a loser, telling myself I shouldn't do this anymore, be productive? Why would that help my emotions? Well, because it takes away the future possibility of rejection, the future possibility of pain. If I don't do anything, then I won't feel bad. Sure, there'll be some sort of kind of numbing effect. I think anyone who's been in a sort of situation where they're not doing anything with their lives kind of experiences that. But at least you're avoiding pain. And to your ego, that's good enough for your ego. Any questions so far? Do you then attack the ego instead of making an argument? No, because if you attack the ego directly, that's just going to make them more inflamed. If they have a high sense of superiority and you're like, oh, you just think you're better than everybody else, they're going to double down, because then their ego is attacked even more and their logic becomes even more compromised, and they're trying to protect themselves from more emotions. They're trying to protect themselves from... If they believe you're right, for example, they're going to feel a lot of pain. So they're trying to avoid that pain as much as possible. So I wouldn't try to attack somebody's ego if you were having an argument with them. Yeah, the ego is a very big self-defense mechanism. Usually it's a defense from painful emotions. That could be rejection in the sense of picking yourself up, or rejection in terms of, I'm going to stop trying. I'm going to give a logical reason as I'm ugly, I'm stupid, so I should never date again. And that protects you from future pain and future rejection. Yeah, I can give a recap. So we have multiple parts of our mind, and these parts interact with each other to make up you. So you have your emotional mind, which is, as the name implies, where you get your emotions from. It's also where you get your likes and dislikes. It's very volatile, it's quick, and doesn't really have any thought associated with it. Then there's your intellect, which is the logical part of your mind, the analytical part of your mind. This is the part of your mind that kind of tries to make decisions about your life, irrespective of all this other stuff. Your ego is your sense of identity. Anything that follows I am ... So I am a man, I am a lawyer, I am ugly, I am... It's pick your poison. This is also where comparison comes in, because in order to compare yourself, there needs to be a you and there needs to be another person. Therefore, that sort of I feeling still needs to be there. Then, finally, you have your samskaras. This is like your emotional storehouse. So when you feel an emotion from your emotional mind, sometimes we don't process it. Sometimes we're busy, sometimes we're distracted, and we don't really want to feel our emotions. But they need to go somewhere. And so they go into your samskara and then are activated in certain situations that are similar to the event. For example, you have a phobia of dogs from when you were 6, and now whenever you see a dog, you start to feel fear again. That's an example of your samskaras activating. Finally, your samskaras are what create your ego. when you have a bunch of negative emotional experiences, often that can lead to an identity, often being like, I'm a loser, I'm not worth it. Or, for example, you can have a bunch of positive experiences, just winning all the time, just doing great, sleeping with whoever we want, and then you have an identity of, I am a winner. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's kind of how each part of the mind influences one another, influences each part. Is everybody on the same page? Okay, cool. Now I'm just going to clear this so we have more space. So now we're going to understand how do we get rid of samskaras? I will get to that. Now we get to actual application. Give me a second, just check my notes. So let's say you have a problem. In this case, we'll take an example from a personal life. Say, should I break up with this person? Now, let's go through each part of the mind and see how they influence each other. So, sorry, before that, I should specify. The reason rumination and intellectualization happens is because we are only fixated on the Buddhi. We only fixated on the intellect. And often we don't understand that our ego is getting in the way. Our ego is compromising it. Our samskaras are compromising it. Our previous experiences, they're compromising it. Sometimes our immediate reactions, our immediate emotions are also compromising it. And so we're blind. We're blind to all these sort of influences. And just trying to run off logic. It doesn't make sense. You don't have all the information to work with. And the point of rumination, the point of thinking through a problem, is to find a solution. But you can't find a solution if you don't have all the evidence. If you're blind to, if you're in a case and you're blind to a key piece of evidence, your entire argument falls apart. You're never going to get anywhere. And therefore, we keep spinning in the cycle of like, there has to be a solution, there has to be a solution, maybe this, maybe that, maybe that. Which is why we need to understand each part of the mind. Or else we'll get trapped in these sort of cognitive biases, these sort of patterns of how we operate our lives that are unhealthy. And so understanding each part of the mind is what allows you to break out of this. So, again, should I break up with this person? The first thing you should ask yourself when trying to answer this question is, what does my ego think? In this case, ironically, it was, I am a good person. And you're probably wondering, how is believing or having the identity of being a good person going to get in the way of like making a decision or like making the right moral decision? I think we all here care about being virtuous, kind people. And so that seems a little strange. But this can often be a very insidious sort of thinking pattern. Because if I'm a good person, I can be easily guilted into making certain decisions that don't feel morally right. And it does sacrifice yourself. You're right, Danny. In my head, for example, breaking up with a person goes directly against my ego. It goes directly against this sort of belief, this sort of identity I build up for myself. Angelo actually has a great video about this of, would you rather be good or do good? And so in this case, I was more concerned with feeling good, feeling like a good person, believing my identity and keeping my identity intact, than doing the good thing. So that was getting in the way. Also, my emotions were getting in the way. I was feeling guilt, anger, sadness. You can imagine some of this comes from this disconnect between my ego and what is the right decision. The guilt, for example, or the sadness that maybe I have to do the wrong thing. But anger is an interesting one. You wouldn't think, oh, this person's angry about the idea of breaking up with the person. Which is what we'll get to in part 3, which is emotional awareness. But we'll get to that in a bit. This is also where you deal with and process samskaras. So, my ego, with this idea of being a good person, it goes to my Buddhi. And it's like, well, you know, I'm choosing to be selfish in this moment. But it's also at the cost of myself. And am I not a person too? And then you can see how you're really in conflict with yourself. There's like no good solution. Because it's operating under the assumption of my identity. Does that make sense? Let me see, what else have we got? Yep. So, in this situation, my samskaras didn't activate that much. I wasn't thinking of previous experiences that much. No, I'll rectify that. There was one experience that was really getting in the way of me trying to figure out, should I break up with this person? I had a samskara. During my last breakup, I broke up over text. And I felt incredibly guilty about that because it wasn't the right thing to do. I didn't give the other person closure. It just wasn't a good thing to do. And that amplifies the guilt. This makes the guilt even stronger. Suddenly, again, my manas activates, my emotional mind, my samskaras. I'm feeling a lot of this guilt, and it makes trying to figure this out so confusing. But here's where we get to a really big problem. Most men, I would say, have what's called normative male alexithymia, meaning most men are colorblind to their emotions. Instead of saying, I feel guilty, I feel anxious, I feel sad, in this sort of situation, they'll often feel, they might not be able to tell you. I think a lot of men wouldn't be able to tell you what they're feeling. Or they would describe it in like, I'm feeling a lot of pressure. I'm feeling a lot of weight. I think that's how men describe it. When we get broken up with, it's like, I got kicked in the nuts. Instead of being like, oh, I feel a lot of shame and rejection and insecurity. No, but like, damn, I got bent over and fucked. We use very physical language. Which in of itself is not a problem. But it gets in the way of being able to make sound decisions, and you'll see why in a bit. Which is where we get to emotional awareness. I'm going to do a quick recap and then get to some questions. So you see how this problem I'm having of should I break up with this person has a multitude of factors that make it very complicated to answer it. My ego gets in the way of I am a good person, so I'm feeling morally conflicted. Even though what is actually good in that moment, while it would make me feel like a bad person, is ultimately the good thing to do. And then my ego activates my emotional mind. I'm feeling a lot of guilt, a lot of confusion. My ego goes to my intellect and tries to give me a bunch of reasons as to why I shouldn't break up with this person. I knew what the answer was, but my ego would get in the way and use logic. I'm a smart person. I can convince myself of many things. There's also why people with high IQ tend to experience higher rates of depression, because they can logically make an argument as to why they suck. Just better. And also, I had this past experience that was also getting in the way, that was making things even more confusing, making me feel even more guilty. So we can all understand how, through these different parts of the mind, how complicated it makes the situation, right? Yeah, Matty, I would agree. I'm thinking of a character from the series Brandon Sanderson Mistborn, kind of in Calcutta, who's like very stoic, very doesn't talk about emotions. But yeah, a lot of the characters we like are stoic, are uh, you know, very much the paragon of masculine ideals. And do often, I would say, have an exothymia, which is Lord, we'll get to what to do if we're lexothymic, because we set the stage now. What do we do about it? Emotional awareness. This is where this comes in. There are multiple things you can do to boost your emotional awareness. I would say the main thing for men, especially, is something called somatic awareness. So researchers have done really interesting research on the topic, and they've actually used heat maps to locate where people feel their emotions. For example, when I'm angry, I feel a boil like rumbling in my stomach. When I'm sad, I feel a tightness in my throat. Often, a lot of these men, or us just in general, have a hard time knowing if they're sad, or even if they're, like, whether they're sad or angry, or if they're sad in the first place. What we can notice is, oh, like, my stomach feels a little tight today. And then ask yourself, like, what could this be? Is this an emotion? If it is an emotion, what kind of emotion? I will post what's called an emotion wheel, if that helps people. But even the process of being like, oh, I'm feeling a pit in my stomach, I'm feeling pressure, even that heightens your awareness and heightens the amount of information you have to solve the problem. So for people who struggle with alexithymia, I would focus on that. Secondly, emotional avoidance. This really fucks up with emotional awareness. Going back to the breaking up example, the intolerance, the inability to feel my guilt, expounded this issue into way longer than it should have, because I kept avoiding it. I kept telling myself, no, this isn't true. Again, my Buddhi was compromised. It was hijacked. I would doom scroll, or I would do other things. I would procrastinate, really getting to the root of this issue. Because often our emotions are very uncomfortable and we don't want to deal with them. And so how do we actually allow ourselves to feel our emotions? I would say the key principle is just let it be. Obviously, that's easier said than done, but when you feel that tightness in your chest, you've done some somatic awareness, you've leveled up on your alexithymia, you can be like, oh, maybe I'm feeling angry because of this pit in my chest. Usually, when we name it like that, it gets exposed, it starts growing. We start feeling very uncomfortable. So all you have to do is let it be. The way we do that is through something called urge serving. This is a technique used in treating addictions. And all it is, you don't have to beat. Like, if you want to doom scroll because of your anger, like you don't want to feel your anger, or for most men, it would more so be avoiding sadness. If you don't want to feel sad, and you're like, I'm going to go doom scroll. These aren't very logical moments, they're very reactive. But if you're aware of that, you don't have to fight yourself, you don't have to try to win in a logical battle. You just watch it. You watch it like a wave. Almost imagine if, for anyone who's gone surfing, you're just letting the wave rise up and then crash. Because eventually it will crash. One of the key components of the body is that it always returns to homeostasis. It always returns back to baseline. And so if you can, all you have to do is be patient in order to sit with your emotions. But obviously that's hard. And sometimes we can't be patient. So another technique is to use our physical body. So we have breathing techniques. Like box breathing. For those who were in 102, I taught a breathing technique called alternative nostril breathing. I can't spell. Funny enough, I read a paper about how emotions only last 90 seconds, which I don't know if that's fact or cat, but often the dwelling on an emotion instead of just feeling it, like your intellect starts analyzing this emotion, or then you feel angry, you feel guilt for feeling angry, for example, and that kind of perpetuates the cycle. But it is from a pragmatic standpoint, it is useful to think this might last a while. But pick your any sort of activity that grounds you. So going to the gym can be great for this. Yoga, Tai Chi. Sometimes these things can be used as avoidance, but positive avoidance, let's say. But you have to meet yourself where you're at. If you're unable to just sit with it, to urge that, then try some of these other stuff. What does continuing your emotions mean? I'm not sure what you mean by like continuing to experience them or going deeper. That's kind of what I mean. As in, if you just let them happen, and by the nature of the emotion, it will continue to experience until it dies out. It will just, you'll understand it through sitting with it, is what I'm saying. You don't need to force the emotion or anything like that. So I'm going on this walk. I'm taking a walk. I'm trying to figure this out. Here's what I would ideally do, looking back, is I would observe instead of analyze. I notice, oh, like I'm really ruminating. I'm really like just really in my intellect. I'm really in my head right now. Okay, what am I feeling? What am I feeling in my body? Oh, like a pit in my stomach. Oh, I'm feeling guilt. Oh, I'm feeling anger. Okay, but where does that anger come from? then I start to think, oh, like about my experiences, my samskars. Oh, this previous experience about my ex-girlfriend, I'm bringing up with her. One very good thing, if you want to understand if your ego is in play, is to ask yourself, if you're dreading doing an action, ask yourself, what does this say about my identity? In this case, me breaking up with this person would be like, I'm not a good person. So naturally, obviously, I have the ego of like, oh, I am a good person. I don't want to go against this conception I made of myself. Oh, okay. I'm trying to feel good instead of doing good. And suddenly the answer makes sense. Finally, my Buddhi. Now that I'm aware of all these influences that are controlling it, can finally just do its thing. It's free from all this, from its samskars, ego. You're aware of its effect on like your emotions, and suddenly I can think logically. I can be like, okay, well, I don't like this situation. This is not the kind of person I want to build a life with. I still like this person. I still like to be friends with this person, but I don't want to continue in a romantic relationship with them. Now that all the pieces are in place, my logic can finally work and I can come to an answer. So, again, I've done the emotional awareness. I felt what was in my body. I've let it be. Going for a walk is a very useful way to let your emotions just kind of nestle, go back to homeostasis. I'm aware of what my ego is doing and how it's affecting me, how it's making me avoidant. I'm aware of my previous experiences, of my samskars, and how that's making me feel more guilty than I should. And then, with that awareness of all these things, I can let my intellect do its thing. So that is what I would do in sort of a... Hopefully I did not complicate this too much, but that's what I would do in order to solve a big task like this. Ultimately, it all comes down to awareness. It comes down to recognizing what is going on within your body, what is going on within your mind. What are the outside factors that are influencing you? And you kind of sit with them. And eventually the answer is made clear. I'm wondering if I had anything more in my notes. I don't think I did. There were a couple things that I missed, but they don't seem useful as of right now. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. You can unmute for this one. Like, do people want a summary? If they have any more questions left, if they want to unmute and ask that question, that's cool too.
What about reinforcing emotions? Like you have a situation and then you go back on that situation to try to see what your emotional reaction is in that situation and going over it multiple times to fully understand what you're feeling and why you're feeling this.
Okay, yeah, I get you. Thank you. This actually reminds me. I need to explain how to deal with samskars and how to process them, which is exactly what you're saying. Is I would say one technique that is very useful is write it down in terms of like just the event. So I did this, they did this, I did this, they did this. Try to be as factual as possible. Then go down, analyze it. Be like, okay, what did I feel in this situation? What were the emotions that came up? And you'll sort of start to see a pattern, usually. In general, you want to do this about the first sort of experience you've had. So if I have an irrational reaction to somebody insulting me, ask yourself, when was the first time that I experienced this level of anger towards someone? When was the first time I experienced this level of injustice, for example? Do the exercise, as I've said. And you'll usually start to feel a lot of emotions swell up. This is where practicing urge surfing, practicing being with them, using these sort of breathing techniques or yoga or exercise to really just let yourself feel those emotions. And then that samskara will be weakened. It will be less powerful next time. Moreover, the fact that you've just noticed it, you've noticed, oh, I'm having an irrational reaction here, that's probably a samskara. Even that will weaken its power. In the same way of, you can also weaken the ego just by noticing it. Like, oh, this is my ego talking. Does that answer your question?
I guess so.
How do we decide which type is having a more deep effect on my decision? For example, should I break up with this person? Anything I feel, how would I know? So I think what I'm trying to understand is, or what you're trying to say is, how do I know which parts of the mind is having the most effect? You will be able to... So emotions, for example, from your emotional mind, your manas, you'll be able to feel that in a sensory sort of situation. And then if you want to get clear on how it's influencing you, you can ask yourself two questions. What is this trying to tell me? And what is this motivating me to do? If somebody punches me in the face and I start to feel angry, it's motivating me towards punching someone back. And it's telling me that an injustice has been done to me. Now, I don't have to act on the decision to punch someone, but I can still integrate it into my intellect, into my decision making, to be like, okay, an injustice is done to me. I'm going to file a restraining order, or like sue this person, or I'm going to stop associating with them. That way you can integrate your emotions into your intellect. Reminder, so when we've understood like what is this, if I'm having a situation I'm trying to avoid it, what does this tell me about myself? What does it tell me about my identity? If I'm avoiding going on stage, if I go on stage and I get laughed at, it confirms that I am a loser. It confirms that, oh, I'm never meant to be a star, if that's your dream, or whatever, something like that. And then you can ask yourself, okay, this is my ego. I have a conception of myself, an understanding of myself. Do I want to follow that understanding of myself, follow that identity, or do I want to do something else? Notice how the more awareness you have of these different parts of yourself, the more your logic stays intact. The more you're able to utilize your logic in a way that serves all parts of yourself. I hope that answered the question. Perfect. And then Maddie says, I heard someone imagined going through an event through three different persons of view. I forget what POV means, but I know what you mean. Would that be considered... Yeah, point of view. Would that be considered an exercise? Would they be... I'm running over my words now. Yes. So this is a great thing to do to notice your ego at play. Because when you... Like, think about it. We're zooming out of our perspective into somebody else's perspective. It's no longer about me. It's no longer about I. It's about this other person. What might they be feeling? Suddenly, when you take another person's point of view, there is no sense of me. There's no sense of I. It's just that person and their point of view. So you remove your ego from the equation. So yes, that is a very good way to be aware and control your ego. Any other questions while we still have time?
Just Philiad asked earlier up what the knowledge or theory is called that we were talking
Yes.
about.
So I'm talking about. I would say I would consider this Vedic psychology, or you can just consider it yogic psychology. I will post that in the chat for everybody. It is Indian.
And yes, Lord, it is certainly Indian.
Comes from the Vedas, hence the term Vedic. Okay, if nobody else has any more questions, I want to thank everybody for coming. I'll give it a couple more minutes, but maybe prematurely. I want to thank everybody for coming. I appreciate you all listening, and I hope this helped you in some way.